Hi guys, welcome to Tuesday of week 3. Today we're reading from Philippians 2, 5 through 11 in the ESV. Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, and being found in human form, he humbled himself by being obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Therefore God has highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name that is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow, in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. This makes me think, so we were just reading this and stuff, and I think my dad, from when we're filming this, I think my dad just was preaching about this. And I think it was this passage where the disciples, I forget who, do you remember, who was it that was like, can we sit on the left and right hand? Was it Simon and,
Oh,
wasn't
no,
Peter,
it was Zebedee, John and his brother James, right?
Yeah, John and James, yeah. And they were like, can we sit on the left and right hand of you? And Jesus is like, are you willing to be baptized
By my baptism and
Yeah.
from my cup.
Yeah. And they were both like, oh yeah. Like that was literally their response. And in staff meeting, we kind of do a devotional together and we were all laughing because we're like, they have no idea.
Mm-hmm.
They have no idea, and I had just been having this conversation with my son because he was complaining about, I think, doing chores. And I was like, do you have any idea? Like it was something, I was like, oh, could you clean that up? And of course, I'm sure any parents know this. Could you clean that up? I didn't make that mess. I'm like, oh, well then. I was like, if we're going there, by all means, clean up the whole house because I didn't make the majority of this mess. I'm like, did I do all the dishes? Did I eat all the food? And here you guys are. I didn't do that. Anyways, and I was like, do you have any idea what we do for you? And he was like, yes. And I was like, no, you don't. I know you don't because I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And I had zero clue until I became a parent. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is all day, every day, many times into the night, being a parent, And I was just always think of that perspective of being an adult and talking to your child. And how much more experience and knowledge you have from just living your life.
Mm-hmm.
And then thinking about that and flipping it towards God of us living our life and then thinking how much more we know than God or how much and so I was just thinking about that, like where they're like, oh yes, and he says you will, like you will drink from my cup and you will be baptized by my baptism. But they didn't know what that meant until later, when it was actually happening. But that's the king that we follow is the one who humbled himself. And I love the way that he says this, that humbled himself to the point of death, even death on a cross.
Right, shameful death.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he comes into the form of a human and shows us how to be fully human, like living the life the way he lived it.
Right.
But then also to then be the one to sacrifice his life and showing that through that sacrifice, then he has the power over death to come back. But then also it's like, I think of that daily, pick up your cross daily and follow me, and being a husband or being a father and being able to it was a shock to me becoming married and becoming a father.
I like how you just said becoming married. Like he chose to be married.
I chose this, but the responsibility, life's responsibilities, I was not prepared for. I did not know what drinking the cup of being a husband was, or doing that stuff.
Right.
But I have many times come to that point where I sacrifice my desires versus the good of the family, and then sacrifice what I want for the good of my children, or sacrifice what I feel like doing for what my company needs me to do. It's just like in every role that we play, I feel like the only way to come to life is to then refine and sacrifice yourself. And then on the other end, you find new life and also new blessing where you actually give up those things that should be given up, but then also those desires of your heart, like we've said, are blessed. And your work shows, but it's actually the work that follows God's will.
Right. Yeah, because I was going to ask you how you feel after doing that stuff. Because, I think it's important, like, women carry a lot of the family work, right? So there's like the mental load, the physical load, depending on, they've done studies where even if the woman, the husband and the wife both work full time, that the wife will still do more of the household work and household chores and raising the children. Like she does more of that work, about 70% of it compared to the husband. And so it's not saying don't take a rest, because that's actually what God calls us to do all the time. It's actually like questioning, what are the desires of your heart? Mm-hmm. When are you sacrificing? Like this could be anything, right? Like, are you driving your children into the ground by the amount of activities that you're putting them in? Yeah. And not only that, but are you driving your family into the ground by the amount of activities that you put them in? And then what's the value and what's reward in that, compared to the reward of like being present with each other, compared to the reward of like actually taking a day off where no one has to run around like a chicken with their head cut off. Yeah. So he's not saying like continue to sacrifice and don't rest, because there are probably so many parents watching this like, I feel like I've given up everything. But my question to you is, what are you giving up? Yeah. And what desires are you actually giving up, and what are you actually feeding? Because I think so many times we're actually feeding what I would like the beast, and I don't mean that like Satan. I mean like we're feeding like the beast of society. That's like, go work, try harder, do more activities. If your kids aren't signed up for this and doing that, they're going to fall behind and all this stuff. And what are you feeding into when you make these decisions? Because when you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. What Byron and I are talking about is like when we've made those decisions, those sacrificial decisions, where you come out the other end and you feel better. Right. You feel more rested. You feel like I can't tell you the amount of times that I like this just happened on Sunday. I was exhausted. I lay down. I took a nap. I got up. Byron had made dinner, and typically what we try to do, it doesn't always work out, but we try to do where if one person makes dinner, the other person does the dishes. And not only that, but we also trade off like kind of who's in charge of putting the kids to bed. So this night I was exhausted. Byron had made dinner and he was supposed to already put the kids to bed. And I was looking at this pile of dishes and I was like, I feel like I'm going to die. Like I am so tired. I just want to go lay down. And if I had said to Byron, I need to go lay down, he would have said it's fine. But I knew that he was going to be up super late then. And I also knew he was tired. And so I got up and I put my dishes down. I looked at the pile of dishes and I was like, I'm just going to turn on some music and I'm going to start working on these dishes. And I not only finished all the dishes, but I was like, okay, like I'm going to at least make breakfast for Monday. But then I was like, well, that's not baking anything. I was just going to do overnight oats. So now I'm going to bake breakfast. I'm not saying all that to say like, oh, look what I did. What I'm saying is that when I started to sacrifice my own needs for the needs of my husband, I started to gain energy. And all of a sudden, none of it felt like a burden. I didn't go to bed being like, oh, that was awful. And I had to do this and I had to do that.
And look at how much I sacrificed.
Yeah. And it wasn't too much, because there have been times where I've just had to say I'm out. Like there have been many times. I mean, he's definitely been stuck putting the kids to bed, cooking dinner, and doing all the dishes where I've been like, I'm out. But this was one of those nights where I was like, no, like I can make a sacrifice right now. And that's why I think the difference. I think when we make that sacrifice, the way that Christ asks us to make a sacrifice, when we're sacrificing like a selfish desire of ours, we actually enter into that space feeling energized and easy. And that's what I think Jesus means when he says, my yoke is light and my burden, it's the opposite. My burden is light, my yoke is easy. Yeah. You know?
And like you said, like since when we were first together, the desires of my heart have changed because I made the bad ones die and I fed the good ones, and so it's actually like, well, I don't really have those desires, so it's it becomes, at first it's hard, but it becomes easier and easier and easier as you'll get on that track.
Because they turn into habits then. And then those habits are easier in both ways. If you start a bad habit, it's easier to continue. But if you start a good habit, it's easier to continue as well. But I also think that we're rewarded in those sacrifices. And I think some of that reward is that actual feeling of like goodness afterwards. You know, who was just, I think it was one of our kids was just saying they did something, and they were like describing how good they felt afterwards.
Yeah.
You know, and I think it's that, like, when you make that sacrifice out of like an actual desire to sacrifice for someone else, not the like, well, I guess they'll do this for you, but you know, secretly in your head, you're like, now they owe me. Like, you know.
But then it's like doing the good work that the garden requires.
Right.
Will tire you out, but then making sure you make space to have that day of rest.
Right.
You know.
Right. Like to honor the Sabbath. Truly, whatever that looks like, and sometimes that means going to bed without doing the dishes. You know, but sometimes that's also saying, like, instead of scrolling on my phone, instead of watching that TV show. And that's where I think some of that stuff comes in. Like, I think two of their biggest things, people with families, are the children's activities. And then everyone. It's like social media, online shopping, watching
keeping
TV.
Up with shows. It's like, be fine with being like, well, I guess this series I just won't take part in.
Right.
I mean, there's so many shows. I think I stopped watching Marvel at the second Iron Man.
Yeah.
But I just can't keep up.
Right.
And being okay with it. Being okay with missing out on what our culture's saying you need to keep up with.
Right. Because again, that's looking at that. Like, what is God's value versus what if our values? And our values, like especially our cultural ones, are never going to be better than God's values. And the reward from them are never going to be better than God's. So this is like a tough verse. I feel like we're saying a lot. I just want to emphasize that, like, we're saying a lot of things that we do. We also fail all the time, constantly, in many, many, many ways, in all of these things. But this is a great verse to meditate on. So you have your devotion down here. Check it out. There's some questions to answer as usual, and we'll see you tomorrow.